Just waiting for a couple more people. Then we'll get started. Okay, let's get started. Just a quick note, Mayor Holder does send us regrets. He won't be able to join us today for public. A couple of housekeeping things as usual. A recording of this meeting is expected to be posted to YouTube by tomorrow. Usually it gets up there pretty quickly, so you can always access those recordings. We've had a fulsome discussion about returning to in-person last month, so we're still monitoring, and we have a couple of goals in mind, and hopefully at some point, maybe later this year, we'll be able to return to in-person. Before I start, I did just want to acknowledge that the anniversary of the horrific attack and murder of members of the Afsval family is coming up pretty soon. It's around the corner. I know it's going to be a very difficult time for many people. I know there's lots of events planned, so hopefully that will serve as just those little pieces of healing bit by bit as a community. So just wanted to acknowledge that as well. So I'll call the meeting to order. It's 2:02 p.m. and let's start with disclosures of interest. Okay, seeing none, we'll move along to introduction of new business. We have a few business items. The first is correspondence from a London citizen to Mayor Holder's office related to traffic enforcement. So we're going to add that to agenda number 5, and Deputy Chief Betts is going to speak to that. Second, there was a complaint about identifiers on police uniforms made a few months ago, and it was supposed to be heard as part of the governance committee public meeting, but we didn't have time, so we have moved it to this piece, and Deputy Chief Betts will be talking to us about that as well. And then finally, there was a discussion about public consultations at the Public Governance Committee as well. And the Governance Committee made some recommendations to the board, so we'll add that as a new business for the board to discuss. So the one will be to item number 5, the rest will be added to number 10. So if I could get a motion to add those items, moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Member Branscombe. All in favor? And that is carried. Excellent. Next up are minutes of the April 21st Public London Police Services Board meeting. Unless there's any concerns, I'll look for a mover to adopt those minutes. Moved by Member Shabar, seconded by Member Branscombe. All in favor? Excellent, that's carried as well. And moving right into the public correspondence that I mentioned at the top for as new business. And Deputy Chief Betts, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that particular complaint and just the challenges that are facing traffic enforcement. We can't hear you, Deputy Chief Betts.
Sorry, Chair, I haven't done that one in a while, but we'll start over. Through you and to the board and everybody joining us here today, I'm just responding to some correspondence the board received with regard to just the traffic presence or lack of traffic enforcement presence here in the city of London recently. And I do appreciate the opportunity to be able to address a few things here and can say that I'm not entirely surprised by the sentiment. Traffic is a perennial top 3 community complaint, which is why it always appears in our business plan priorities year after year. And that's not unique to the City of London. In many cases, traffic complaints are more than just driving behavior. They can also include infrastructure and overall congestion on the roads due to increasing population. And as the writers pointed out, he sees levels of decreased levels of LPS officers conducting traffic enforcement. He's not wrong, and I have no reason to doubt him. And I imagine each and every one of us have had near daily moments, as he's indicated, that we wish there was an officer around to capture that driver who just did something silly at the low end or dangerous at the high end, whether we're in another vehicle, on a bicycle, or on our feet. So much has been publicly stated about the demands on the front line related to radio calls for service, and the majority of which means that, quite frankly, there just is less time for proactive work to be done, and that proactive work often entails things like traffic enforcement. So when our frontline officers aren't able to conduct proactive traffic enforcement, it leaves that work to fall to a proportionally small traffic unit. With just 8 full-time and 4 part-time members, this small unit of 12 decreased from 14 to provide staffing elsewhere, and including the front line, is responsible for conducting the overwhelming share of enforcement of road safety here in London. And as you know, that unit hasn't grown as the city's grown. So the writer's not wrong, enforcement has been down. However, we are vigorous in our efforts and serious about road safety. And we are also serious about the fact that traffic is every uniformed officer's responsibility. But I will say, when facing a queue of 200 plus calls, and it breached that number just the other day, there's little time for that extra traffic work. So when we consider that fatal collisions continue to increase, impaired investigations remain consistently high, stunt driving offenses and charges continue to increase, and collisions involving pedestrians and cyclists continue to increase, the small unit of dedicated officers is definitely working hard, and when possible, they're using absolutely every resource at their disposal to identify where and when they can conduct their enforcement in the most efficient way possible. And that technology includes some use of devices that allow us to validate community speeding complaints. It allows us to assess speeds, certain areas over the course of days and weeks, including a highest speed, median speeds, types of vehicles. We hear about motorcycles at this time of the year. This data shows us and allows us to follow an evidence-informed approach to deploying our meager resources to the right places at the right time. And that's what we do. So when we don't see them around the city in random stop sign enforcement, it's because we're targeting our enforcement based on where the demands have been able to be demonstrated. And so I could make an entire presentation on traffic enforcement and road safety, but I won't do that to you here today. But suffice to say that the writer's observations are not entirely without merit, and they're another indicator of an organization struggling to meet the demands, has been part of the chief's messaging for the past several months. I recognize this isn't a service complaint, but I do want to validate the citizen's observations and assure him and others that we are indeed out there. We initiate projects that focus on the very behaviors indicated in his letter. We lead enforcement blitzes as best we can. There's a reference to invisible traffic enforcement. And in this, he's also not entirely wrong, because many of our vehicles that are engaged in traffic enforcement are in fact invisible. They have no markings. And the first time somebody sees that vehicle, maybe when those flashing blue and red lights are in their rearview mirrors. So the consequences of poor driving range from fines at the low end to jail at the high end. The impacts are significant. We will continue and do continue to enforce road safety. It is everybody's responsibility. I'll put out some more messaging on that through the social media later today and over the next few days, because this happens to be National Road Safety Week as well as Police Week. So hopefully that addresses and acknowledges the concerns that are raised, not to provide an excuse, but maybe to provide some additional context. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Deputy Chief. Any comments or questions for the Deputy Chief? Seeing none, thanks so much again for that update. I think that is something that's on everyone's mind, and so it's good to recognize and validate those concerns and remind people that this is part of the messaging that we've been hearing, that we need more resources. So if I could get a motion to accept for informational purposes that public correspondence that was sent to Mayor Holder's office but forwarded to the board, moved by Councillor Cassidy, second by Member Branscombe, all in favor, and that carries. Next, another very, very serious matter. Deputy Chief Betts, if you can talk to us about the 2021 hate-motivated crime incidents report.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. This report's coming to the board as an annual report to provide an update on hate-motivated crime and incidents here in here in London during 2021, as well as a 5-year review. I will start by saying that the content of this report and the very nature of it may trigger some fear and anxiety for some. That is not our intent. However, it's important, I think, to put that out there in the event there are some who do not wish to be part of this particular presentation. So joining us for this portion of the meeting is the entire command team of the Uniform Division Community Mobilization and Support Branch that supports our hate crime investigations as well as diversity and outreach. And I think it's important that they be part of this presentation and that they're at least here to, well, to hear what we're saying about them, because they're the ones who are shouldering a lot of the hard work in this. And included in that is going to be our hate crime investigator, Constable Gulid Mohammed, as well as Acting Sergeant Ziad Zabian. I'd also like to acknowledge that hate-motivated crimes and incidents are insidious in nature, and their impacts are far-reaching, and they can undermine feelings of safety and security. And it's important to note that although this is a local report and we'll be focusing on local incidents, we are impacted by provincial, national, and international events, as are others when these incidents and crimes take place here in London. By their very nature, these types of crimes inflict harm on more than a single victim. They impact an entire community, and in some cases, that community is global in nature. And finally, I think we should acknowledge that as hurtful as these occurrences are, the people of London continue to show their resilience and their support to victims of such crimes. And from that, all the communities are targeted. And in this way, it demonstrates that Londoners have no tolerance for those who spread and perpetuate such acts of intolerance and hate. So to the report itself, as you'll see in 2021, we saw a significant increase in the total number of hate bias motivated occurrences as defined within that report. This means all incidents and crimes. And that increased from 93 in 2020 to 146 in 2021. The year 2020 was also an increase from 2019. As the report indicates, there are maybe several reasons for this. However, high-profile, incredibly tragic events that happen almost always lead to an increase in reporting in the days, weeks, and months following that event. Such was the case in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd, and again in 2021 when terror struck the Afzaal family. You'll note in the charts provided that the 5 most targeted communities include the Black community, the LGBTQ2+ community, the Muslim community, the Jewish community, and as a larger community, those that identify as belonging to the Middle Eastern community. I suppose if there's a positive from all of this is that we've seen more than double the number of charges laid in 2021 over the previous years. However, we've seen some of the largest increase in numbers in terms of property damage and violent crimes that are hate and bias motivated. In fact, most recently, over the last 2 days, we've had reports of that in our own social media. As you'll note in this report, the responses to crimes of this nature is multifaceted, not just at responding and investigating, but also in terms of supporting victims and communities. In 2022, we restructured our response to hate bias motivated crimes, not to take away from our team approach, but rather to enhance it by appointing a dedicated investigator who has and will continue to receive specialized training, as well as expanding the diversity unit to increase our proactive capacity. Of course, if the need arises, these officers have the full support of the entire LPS at their disposal. Further, the London Police Service is a participant in the Hate Bias Crime Extremism Investigative Team. And we have been since 2003. We were one of the founding partners, if you will, in that particular team. This team is funded by the province, which provides financial assistance to police services by supporting it to assist in coordinating intelligence gathering by providing specialized investigative support on matters involving hate propaganda, the promotion of genocide, hate-motivated crimes, and criminal extremism. In fact, London was one of 3 cities across Canada that was asked to participate in a research study conducted and led by academics here in Ontario to try and replicate the findings in Australia and the UK with regard to just what would it take to have somebody report a loved one who was being radicalized. That report is complete. However, it cannot be released yet at this time until it's been properly done so through the agencies that commission that. I will say that the HCEIT, as I had referred to, Hate, Bias, Crime, Extremism Investigative Team, is now a network of 15 police services across Ontario. They specialize in investigations, and they receive annual provincial support, and they work closely with the OPP, Criminal Investigation Service Ontario, RCMP, Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and Canada Border Services Agency. In addition to intelligence gathering and sharing, they also facilitate the provision of training and educational support to police officers and community. Our 2021 statistics are internally generated, and they may be subject to change when the StatCan releases their official 2021 statistics, anticipated early next year. COVID actually slowed down the gathering and release of certain statistics, crime statistics, so that's why we're a little behind in terms of what StatCan has to offer. They would normally come out in July, but we just don't have the 2021. So what we've provided you is what we're able to track in-house. So we don't have provincial and national comparators yet. As you can imagine, these cases are challenging to investigate. We don't always conclude with a suspect being identified, but we do always result in tremendous community impact, and we do provide as much support to that community as we can. It's not my intention to repeat what we have before you, but rather reply to questions this report may generate, realizing that if questions are about specific cases, I may not be able to speak to them. I'll only add that has been covered in previous reports. The police investigate crimes that are believed to be hate or bias motivated, and we bring those to the attention of the Crown Attorney, and we work closely with the Crown Attorney. But the actual determination of a matter of hate is made in the courts. I recognize this likely has generated questions, so I'll stop here and then make the recommendation the board receive this for their information once those questions are concluded.
Thank you so much, Deputy Chief, for that thorough report. Did I see, oh, it's Member Walker?
Sorry, Ali actually had his question, his hand up first.
Oh, you guys are so good at keeping track for me. Thank you. Vice Chair Shabar, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Member Walker. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and Member Walker. If you want to go ahead first, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I can jump in here. So first of all, Deputy Chief Betts, thank you for both your report and your presentation here. Not only just the content of the report, but the sensitivity with which you delivered it. I think that's appreciated by myself and I would imagine my colleagues as well. So thank you for that. I have a couple questions, and then maybe I'll ask one or two, and then I'll just see if any of my colleagues may have some questions. So one of the things that kind of jumped out at me in the report was the concept of proactive, a proactive attempt by the police to engage with these communities that are, I think the communities that you listed, right? So we're talking about the Black community, the LGBTQ, Muslim, Jewish, these types of communities. And you had referenced I'm going to mess up the acronym here, but it was the Hate, Crime, and Extremism Investigative Team, so HCEIT. And I think that sounds like a fantastic approach. The one thing that really a question that arises is this. It seems like this specialized training or this specialized funding deals with the aftermath of a hate motivated attack, right? So there's a member from a marginalized community that's unfortunately targeted in a hate incident or a hate crime. The police come out, they do their investigation. HCEIT, they deal with the communities, not just the individual, but the impacted communities, right? But one of the things that's always struck me about hate crimes as maybe somewhat differentiated from other types of crimes is that the lack of, or maybe the hesitancy of some members of the impacted communities to even report these types of incidents or crimes. And I think that I defer to your expertise and the expertise of the administration, but from what I understand is that sometimes that's a byproduct of, it could be any number of things. It could be security considerations by the member that's, the public that's raising these concerns. It could be a byproduct of, if they're a new immigrant or a refugee or someone that's new to this country, the relationship with the police services and their home countries is not the same here, and so there might be some hesitancy to do, to actually report those things. And so all of that long contextual kind of prelude to my question, which is, in terms of proactively, is there anything that the police service can do in terms of, when we use the term proactive, not just be proactive after the reporting of a hate incidents, but maybe are there any initiatives that the police are doing or maybe could do in these specific communities to say, listen, if you ever find yourselves in a situation where you may be on the receiving end of a hate incident, because we know who the top 5, based on what you said, are, that we can kind of help to facilitate the conditions so that members of these impacted communities will feel potentially less hesitant in even approaching the police with concerns there, as evidenced again by the fact that George Floyd, we saw a big uptick. After the Afzal family attack, we saw an uptick, right? So it suggests to me that one of two things: either there was an uptick in incidents, or there was a greater propensity to report incidents which exist but are not reported historically, right? So is there anything that the police are doing or could do to try to help facilitate more of those types of reports of hate incidents or hate crimes? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is very insightful, because that actually really is the focus of that replication study that I just mentioned, and that was part of, in fact, what the professors were studying. The professor who reached out to me, I know her for a number of years now, and which is why they, quite frankly, they wanted to come to London. We've seen a number of incidents here in London, and she says, hey, how can we help? Because when we're said and done, our goal here is to leave you with something tangible to help London police sort of increase the likelihood of reporting. Part of what we're doing, and I've had an opportunity to read a confidential copy of that report, and what we are doing is, quite frankly, in line with some of the recommendations that the community members provided in their feedback during that study, and that has to do with building that relationship through the very kind of work that our diversity outreach team are doing, the building that comfort, that trust and confidence in policing. We recognize, however, that much for the reasons you've already outlined, it doesn't matter what kind of a great relationship we may be able to engender. If there are concerns about reprisal, fear of reprisal, or ostracization within their own communities, the likelihood of getting that reporting ahead of time, with enough time to be able to act on it, is going to be lower. There's also concerns and direct feedback from community members that participated in this study that, quite frankly, they were hesitant to get their loved ones in trouble. They wanted to try and address those things themselves. Oftentimes, they tend to escalate to a point before they're ready to tell the police or tell the authorities, and so that's something that we can't necessarily overcome. All we can do is reduce barriers by increasing our capacity in the community to develop those relationships, and that's really what we're trying to do and encourage to do. And I think as we become more reflective of our communities, and we've talked about some of the work that's going on recruiting, the outreach to different communities to try and get somebody who looks like, I'll use the term, somebody who looks like me, and I don't mean me as in male white. I mean somebody who looks like me within the community that we're seeing, who's going to be able to respond to those needs. So I don't know that I've fully answered that, but
No,
that's where we're at.
thank you, Deputy. It was a big question with many facets. No, I appreciate that. Thanks, Deputy Chief Betts.
Vice Chair, do you have any other questions right now, or do you want me to come back to you?
No, why don't you come back to me? I know that others had questions. I can ask my following questions afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, Member Walker.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Before I start, I would like to say that I did have a brief discussion with Deputy Chief Betts around what I'm about to say. And I really want to acknowledge the incredible work of your team. I agree, this work is really, really difficult, and it is very traumatic. The one area where I think there has been a gap is around hatred towards women. And of course, I know that as an intersectional feminist, I take a look at how women fit into a number of different areas. But without naming women as victims of hate crimes, it's very difficult to acknowledge that that is what is actually happening in the lives of women. And so when I read Deputy Chief Bett's description of a hate crime, he says it's any criminal activity committed against a person or property that is perceived to be motivated and or is motivated in whole or in part by the suspect's hate, bias, or prejudice based on real or perceived race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, gender, identity of expression, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, or any other similar factor. And to move on from there and talk about the issue of femicide, which is the killing of women because they are women, what we know is that femicide is defined by the World Health Organization as the intentional killing of women because they are women. However, a broader definition does include killings of women and girls. Very sadly, during the first 4 months of this year alone, 64 women and girls have been murdered in Canada, largely by a man. This is one woman or girl killed every other day in this country. Something we don't hear about. It's something we rarely talk about, and it's oftentimes something that is never named. And if we do not name what is happening to women and girls, they become invisible. And other women and girls then feel they don't have a right to bring forward their concerns because they're not as important as other people's concerns. And so when I look at Appendix A specifically, and it talks about homicides and hate motivated crimes and incidents, I don't see anything on here on this list that actually specifically speaks about women or femicide. And that is concerning to me as a woman, and concerning to me as a woman who is in the community and sees women who are hated with acts of hatred committed against them on a daily basis. And so I understand from Deputy Chief Betts that the Appendix A is part of the policy of the Police Services Board. And I would like to propose 2 motions. And one is that moving forward, for future reports, that the policy that addresses what is included in Appendix A be amended to include femicide as a cause of death, as homicides are. And secondly, given it is the Crown Attorney that is making the decisions about what a hate crime is, I would like to move, because I personally believe, and so does the World Health Organization, that these crimes meet the definition of a hate crime, but we understand today that that's up to the Crown Attorney to determine, and I would move that continued dialogue take place with the Crown Attorney to provide an understanding of femicide as a hate crime, and that secondly, London Police continue to bring forward to the Crown Attorney their proposed hate crimes or hate crimes they have identified, I should say, and in that also include femicide. And I feel really passionate about this because I know women in our community who I have helped who have been killed. And it is very clear that the definition of a hate crime meets all of the criteria for their circumstances. So those are the two areas, and you can fine tune them. And also perhaps Deputy Chief Betts would like to comment, but I would like to propose those two motions.
Thank you, Member Walker. Deputy Chief Betts, did you want to respond to any of that?
I do, thank you, and I appreciate Megan's passion, because I understand that, and you know, I've asked that question myself in the past about why you know, intimate partner violence does seem to meet the broad definition of hate crime, and it's not concluded or included. Now, a couple of things here I'd just like to unpack if I could. Appendix A is actually appearing in the next board report about the investigations conducted through the Criminal Investigation Division, and that's where the chart includes homicides. However, it does conflate here with hate crimes in terms of what Board Member Walker was talking about. So I'll just talk to that piece of it first. The definition is provided for hate crime and hate incident is federally provided to us. So that piece we work with because that's what the legislation provides for us, and those are the definitions that are utilized for the purposes of gathering stats. So not to take away from the veracity of what Board Member Walker was saying with regard to the hate, but that's what we are stuck with federally here in Canada to work with. As far as the board motion, I would certainly leave that to you, although it's not to say that we could not make a board motion to include a breakdown of that particular or an inclusion of that stat in the next board report in that policy. That policy is merely talking about the investigations that are investigated by specialized people in the Criminal Investigation Division. Homicides are in there, but we could certainly perhaps add a little more granularity around who our victims are in those homicides. And if that was enshrined in policy, then that would outlive the legacy of this particular board and administration.
Appreciate that, and I would really rather that femicide be a separate category altogether because it does stand on its own and can't be really integrated into homicides with a special explanation. But secondly, I just wanted to say about the hate crime, just because what I read earlier was actually the federally provided definition of a hate crime. And that's fairly clear that it's around a suspect's hate, bias, or prejudice towards, you know, a sex or gender. So that really, to me, does fit the definition of a hate crime based on the federal government's definition. And so what I know is that there are many times when it comes to women's issues, we are told that we can't make changes, that things are directed by other organizations or levels of government. But if we don't challenge those things, and if we don't see how women's issues fit into those definitions, we are going to continue to see women who are retaliated against and hated because of their gender continue to be killed and face difficult challenges in their life for no other reason than they're a woman, because there is no definition or inclusion of women in the materials that are provided by police. And for many women, it is the criminal justice system that harms women, but also provides the most opportunity to help them. And so we need to make sure they are included and they are named and that it's not just an afterthought. And I would be really encouraged, Deputy Chief Best, or Bets, to see you bring some of these issues forward to the Crown and other levels of government if, as I read it, these are not federally and provincially provided definitions.
Deputy Chief Betts, do you want to respond to any of that?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Definitely correct. They are federally provided to us. But what I wonder is whether or not, because I think this discussion is huge. If we can take this away, maybe discuss this during the coming month and report back to the board on progress next month on addressing this and some additional context we may not have the opportunity to fully get into at this moment, but I leave that to you, Chair. I'm fully prepared to engage with that and with Board Member Walker and the board on that.
Member Walker, just for clarification, and I just want to make sure we have the pieces. So adding the femicide as a data point, so that would be part of the Criminal Investigations Service report, which is the next item, which I think, and I would fully support that as a motion. But then going back to the hate motivated crime report, perhaps a friendly amendment might be that there be a data breakdown and to make sure that we see the gender breakdown in terms of those hate crimes. So again, that would address that intersectionality piece as well. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I think that would be important to have it broken down so that women are recognized when they are murdered as having endured a hate motivated crime. I think that's absolutely critical. And I'm also, with respect, I'm sorry if I'm on the wrong page. I was looking at the CID primary investigation type indicators, and so I'm sorry that's the wrong page, but I would like to see a separate category as well for femicide. And if that can be done without a lot of fanfare, that's great. But I'm also, for other issues around this, happy to meet with Deputy Chief Betts, because, you know, this has been a long time coming for women and other individuals. And I think we've got to just really, as a leader, as you've stated earlier, police are leading the way in many areas, and I think this is an opportunity to really take the lead again and see some concrete changes for women. So, Madam Chair, if you're happy to allow that recommendation to be tabled, that you've just discussed, I'm happy for that, and then follow up with additional meetings with Deputy Chief Betts.
So maybe it's really two friendly amendments. One would be just again separating out what we're looking for in the CID report and then the hate crime report, and then also asking Deputy Chief Betts to report back to us, if possible, in a month's time at the next board meeting, but at least at some point in time. And there was actually another piece to your motion, so I don't want to lose that. So one, for CID reports to include femicide. Two, to include the gender data breakdown in future hate crimes reports. Three, for Deputy Chief Betts to report back, as he said, on this very big important issue. Now there was the other piece was dialogue with Crown Attorney. And sorry, can you just
So that's something maybe we can discuss further, but right now we know that it's the Crown Attorney that's making the decisions around hate crimes. And I think it would be really great to have the opportunity with the police to discuss with the Crown Attorney's office what femicide is as a hate crime. And then further to that, bring over to the Crown Attorney's office the files relating to women killed in London, and ask that those two be identified as hate crimes.
now, do you want to put that into the Deputy Chief Betts reporting back for now, or did you want to vote on that?
Sure. No,
Yeah.
that would be just great. And I have a lot of information around this that I'm happy to sit down and speak with Deputy Chief Betts, or just forward his way, whatever he prefers. I don't want to interfere at all with his work, but just, this is, I think, a really critical issue.
Okay. So just trying to get this, make sure I have this all right. Now, that's been moved. And again, let's call it a three-part right now with the Crown Attorney piece, with Deputy Chief Betts reporting back, and you can also be in touch with him and work with him on that. But people understand what the motion is right now. I think Councillor Cassidy.
I wonder if, to make it cleaner, should we move the femicide data part to the next item, to number 7? Should that motion go with that rather than in this?
I'm comfortable with that. Member Walker, are you okay with that?
So I'm not sure what number 7 is. I'm sorry. I think I've messed this up a bit. I have this appendix A. Is that part of number 7?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was just trying to get everything in at one time. So that's fine. Yes, that's fine.
Okay, that makes sense. So right now the motion will be the including gender data and the hate crimes, and for Deputy Chief to report back and work with you. And then we'll move the next piece of that motion to the next business item. So does that make sense?
Yes, thank you
Okay.
so much.
So that's moved, and Maureen, are you seconding, or do you have? Okay,
And I do have a question also.
go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to second that, and thank you to Ms. Walker for bringing that forward. And it sort of relates to a question that I had for Deputy Chief Betts. The part about the Crown Attorney and bringing data to the Crown Attorney and speaking to the Crown Attorney about all of this. So we've seen a drastic uptick, I would say, in these hate motivated crimes. Especially between 2021 and 2022. And Deputy Chief Betts, you spoke earlier about how it encourages seeing a crime, especially like the one of the Afzal family. It motivates people to come forward and report these incidents rather than just letting them go. I wonder also, because a big part of it is the charges laid and the decisions made by the Crown Attorney. Are we seeing, I would say, progress there in the willingness from the Crown Attorney, especially determining that these are hate motivated crimes and they should be charged as such? So what might have been just a regular assault or something like that in the past, or harassment, is now being classed as a hate crime, whereas is there a change there in how the charges are laid, is my question.
Chair, through you, I will endeavor to do my best on that one, although ultimately the Crown's office may be the best to respond to that. I would suggest that, when we saw terrorism charges laid in the case involving that tragedy with the Afzal family, that was nearly unprecedented, quite frankly. So is there a change? Perhaps that's indicative of a change of that particular approach. I also know that the threshold to meet that requirement to prove hate was the motive, that it was a hate motivated crime, can be extremely high. And our investigators certainly keep all options and avenues open and liaise with the Crown on all of the sort of evidence before them when they're proceeding with an investigation, and that will really direct where the Crowns go in terms of what they feel that they can push forward with. So I think the evidence takes us to that determination, but I don't think that the Crown Attorney's office is shying away from that when that evidence takes them in that direction. And I think we're looking at a prime example of that with the Afzal family tragedy.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, just a bit of a follow-up. Then I guess it is, from my point of view, it would seem then that a testament to the good investigative work that London Police are doing in making sure that everything is there and available to the Crown Attorney so that the appropriate charges can then go through the criminal justice system. So would you say that that is the case? Because that's what I'm seeing, Deputy Chief Betts.
I don't think I could have said it any better than that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. So shall we vote on that motion? And then if there are other questions related to this report, I'm happy to keep going because this is important, but perhaps we can complete that motion. Is that okay? So I'll call that to question. All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Member Walker, for bringing that forward. Member Branscombe. Can't hear you.
One thought I had going through the report and hearing what Megan had to say is I'd be also interested in these 5 most frequently targeted groups, Black, Muslim, Jewish, LGBTQ 2+, and I'm losing the last one in Jewish. If there's any way to break that down into how many of those are women, I'd be just curious. I don't think it's a imperative, but I actually think that might be a different perspective to look at that as well. So
I believe that was part of the motion, was that gender data breakdown. But I agree with you. Yep.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments about that report? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Ms. Walker, for bringing that up. I think that's a real improvement and a gap that needs to be fixed. And I wish it wasn't necessary, but I think it is necessary to disaggregate these things, and so we can really understand the extent of the problem. An issue I want to raise, and it's difficult to talk about this topic effectively without giving the offenders what they want in many cases, which is notoriety and fame. And so I'm gonna leave out all the details about many of the horrific attacks that we've seen, not just here in London, but other places in Ontario, just across the border, all throughout the United States, in Europe, New Zealand, all over the place, is the nature of the offenders. So we're reading a report and we're looking at who is targeted, right? And I think that is important. We need to understand who is being targeted and why. But I also think we need to understand who are the offenders. And I think we all, because we read the news and we pay attention to the highest profile incidents that are reported, we can very easily see that there's a lot of commonalities in the offenders. A lot of them are young, white men who are extremely angry, have terrible ideas about what is wrong in the world and responsible for their problems, and they act out of rage in these horrifically violent ways. And if we're interested in lowering the number of incidents like this that happen, I think we need to be talking about why. Why are these people doing this? What is motivating them? How do we change that so that we don't have so many murders, terrorist attacks, so much violence in our community of this kind? Because it definitely, in both the frequency and the severity, it seems, at least from my perspective, to be worsening significantly, not just here, but throughout the world. People are using vehicles as weapons. Just in Ontario, we had a guy who was trying to find a baby that he could kill. Right? Like, that is just unbelievably horrific. And I think we do need to, in the reporting, not skip past who are the offenders. And I know it's hard to do it in a way that is really helpful. I don't want to get into a situation where we're profiling groups of people and saying, like, these people are they're always the offenders. That's not the case, right? You have to be careful about that. But I do want to just mention it because I think, as a police services board, we need to be thinking a little bit more about who the offenders are and how can we, and we're not going to be able to do all this on our own as a police service, that's for sure, right? It's societal changes that are needed. But I do think we need to be contributing to that part of the conversation. And I wonder if perhaps the chiefs have anything to say about future reports, if it's worth identifying, who's committing these crimes, and sort of from an intersectional perspective, what that looks like in terms of the offenders.
Chiefs, I don't know, Deputy Chief Betts or Chief Williams.
I can give Deputy Chief Betts a break. It wouldn't be difficult for us to break down the demographics of known offenders. Some of these are obviously unknown offenders. That would not be difficult. What is more difficult was your original question, is why. So that is a big question. And there are many reasons why. And I wouldn't know where to start to hypothesize on why. And you're right, young white males are predominantly the offender type. I can't begin to understand, nor do I have the resources to delve into a sociological study on why they are the offenders, primarily, at least in our community, many others, of hate crime and hate incidents. But we could certainly provide a demographic breakdown.
Just briefly, and I don't think we need to resolve this at this meeting, but I do think it might be useful for the board, either in closed session or public session, depending on what's more appropriate, to hear perhaps from some of the other agencies that are involved in a sort of proactive way in trying to identify people who are at high risk of this kind of offense, especially the really serious violence, and what's happening on that front in terms of trying to identify people, stop them before they commit the most serious offenses. Because in not that long ago, there was a fellow who tried to blow up the mall, and it was only because of the work of law enforcement agencies that he was stopped before that happened. And I do think maybe having a discussion about not just what the London police are doing, but what other policing agencies are doing to try to identify the extremist element in particular, I think that would be very helpful for the board. I know that not everything can be stopped before it happens, but sometimes there are very clear signs that somebody is going down a certain path. And I do think that's an area where we could spend some time as a board discussing that issue. So maybe at a future meeting, if that would be appropriate, to have maybe the RCMP or other agencies involved in the provincial task force in to talk about the work that's underway.
Chiefs, is that something that would be doable at a future meeting? Sure, go ahead, Deputy Chief Betts.
Oh, sorry, I'll defer to the chief.
We could certainly extend an invitation. I'd certainly want to fine tune the question that's being put to the other organizations.
Deputy Chief Betts, did you have anything else to add?
I really just wanted to also say that really was the focus of that replicant study that I referenced. And I know that we will have access to that publicly, but I can tell you that is the focus, is how do you get somebody to report on a loved one or a friend? And that is the problem for sure. So.
That's helpful. Member or Vice Chair Shavar, I know you had your hand raised as well.
Yeah, thank you for you, Chair, and I apologize to you, Chair, and to the rest of the members and people here, just because I know we've been speaking about this for almost 53 minutes now, and it's I know we have other agenda items and we need to move on, but it's an important conversation, and I think it's centered in that. So thank you to both Member Walker and Councillor Helmer for your both facets of your conversation, because they've raised some really important issues that I think we haven't paid enough attention to, whether we're talking about gender or we're talking about identity of the perpetrators. I thank both of you for that, for raising those things. My question to you, Deputy Chief Betts or Chief Williams, relates to the actual data itself, right? And the way I understand it, and I'll preface it by saying I don't know what I don't know, and I defer to the experts who do know. So, but when you look at one of the pages in the report here, speaks about kind of the different types of hate crime, or the different types of hate incidents, right? And there's a spectrum, right? They can manifest themselves as property damage on one end of the spectrum, and then they can manifest themselves on the other end of the spectrum with the most grotesque, abhorrent, acts of violence that we, whether we're talking about George Floyd or the Afzal family, or those most extreme examples. Is one form of hate crime or incident indicative of a propensity to the other? And what I'm saying is, are they related in any way? Before we see an Afzal attack, or before we see a Quebec City attack, or before we see a New Zealand or a Pittsburgh synagogue, or a man walk into a grocery store in Buffalo, are there other kind of signs that exist or that manifest themselves through other property damage or other threats or other criminal activities? Or is it just like, is there no causation? Is there no correlation between one or the other? And the reason I'm asking is, if we see see certain trends, right? Well, this year there's been an uptick in property damage for the last 3 years. Is that indicative of anything? Or is it simply that we don't know, and we can never know, just because it's just the nature of the the element of what we're dealing with there. So I don't know, Deputy Chief Betts or Chief Williams, whether my question makes sense or not, but I've tried to articulate it as best as possible. Is there causation between one form or multiple forms of hate crimes and the most extreme forms? And if there is, what can we learn from that?
Chair, I'll take the first shot at that one. It's I think you're getting down the path back to the why they're doing that the chief spoke about, in terms of the in-depth motivation and reasons. When we talk about some of these property crime style of hate crimes, a lot of them are very juvenile in nature, if you will, and so we did tend to see that, the spray painting of graffiti of hate symbols and things of that nature, and what often accompanies those hate symbols and in those incidents, in those crimes, is other sprayed on graffiti that would suggest a very immature mind. And I think the chief spoke to often they're very young white males, very much of an immature mind. So I don't know that we would be able to immediately make a leap to that extremism level in those cases. I think in some of those cases, we're talking about some pretty easily influenced youth who are making really dumb actions without necessarily understanding the impact of those actions. I'd hesitate to get too further deep into the psychology of when do they make that leap, if in fact they make it at all. And I think that is probably worth a study beyond the scope of what I could even begin to offer in terms of what our data would tell us, or what I'm aware of in terms of studies. So.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Betts. Do we have any other member? Councillor Cassidy.
Sorry, really quickly, Mr. Chavez raised this in my mind, because I know as a ward councillor, when I get constituents advising me, so there's a particular park, Constitution Park here in the North End, and multiple times there's been, over the years, there's been swastikas painted in this park. So when that happens, I'm wondering, does that just take place at parks? So parks painted, or in one instance, they actually replaced the bench. Did they notify London Police about that kind of thing? It's now that hate crimes are becoming they're on people's radar, we're paying attention. Is there communication when those kinds of graffiti are taking place at the city?
Chair, through you, I'll say absolutely. I think that's why we do see some of those uptakes, and why we see such a high number of property crimes, because people are aware and they are intolerant of that sort of intolerance within our community. So we get that reported. I can tell you that one of the ones that happened here with regard to the playground, that happened just down the road from my house. And they were very quick to clean that up after a very thorough police investigation. Our hate crime investigator, he doesn't just come at this particular case and just look and see what's there. He canvasses neighbors. He talks to neighbors. He looks and talks to the local school, given some of the juvenile other graffiti that was there. Talks to the local schools, talks to other schools in the area to try and generate awareness. And so that we are, as this is where I talked about that team approach, it's more than just an investigation, but it's also a proactive. In this case, it's reactively proactive, because now we're trying to offset the next and mitigate that from happening elsewhere. but it definitely is reported to us, and we need that, because if, as you've heard us use before, if we just don't know about it, we can't go to it, and we've got to get that word out.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Betts. Any other comments or questions? I would just again thank everybody for this discussion. I know we went over, but it was not a discussion I wanted to rush just because of the topic. So, and again, I would believe somebody thanked Deputy Chief Betts for the sensitivity with which he presented that report, and couldn't agree more. I think the only piece I want to make sure that this gets said, and I believe Member Walker actually raised it in the chat, is we can't talk about hate crimes and the rise in hate crimes without saying the words white supremacy and the rise of white supremacy. And I think historically, communities of color did not feel that white supremacy extremism was taken as seriously as other forms of terrorism. And hopefully that's changing, because we're seeing more blatant displays of white supremacy. We just saw it in the Freedom, quote unquote, convoys, and the display of things like Confederate flags. So just these things are on the rise. So I'm glad this is on our radar, and I hope this continues to be on our radar, both in the ways we react, but maybe more importantly in the ways that we're proactive, both with communities, but also making sure that we're preventing and taking these things seriously. So thank you again. If I could just get a motion to receive for informational purposes the 2021 Hate Motivated Crime Report, moved by Vice Chair, seconded by Councillor Helmer. All in favor? And that is carried. And Deputy Chief Betts, you're back on with the 2021 Criminal Investigation Service Report. And I know we have a motion part, but I'll let you go through it first. We'll put that motion back on the table, and then we can continue any other discussion. So go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I'll just take you very quickly through this one as well. So this next report is the annual report, again, to the board, provides you with an overview of the crimes and clearance rates of select crime types that most often require the investigative resources of those that are working in our Criminal Investigation Division. There's some caveats associated to this particular report, including the fact that the 2021 UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting, crime and clearance rate data will not be available from Statistics Canada until later this summer. Therefore, we have no comparators for provincial and national rates for 2021. However, we'd have provided you with the LPS rates. So the appendix of this report, Appendix A, as we've discussed, provides a 4-year comparison of data with the right-hand column and arrows indicating an increase or a decrease. In some cases, a decrease is indicated in green may in fact not be great. For example, if we have fewer or lower clearance rates, although it has gone down, that's why the arrow is in that direction. I would think it's appropriate to note that there's a significant increase in the homicides last year. We've in fact spoken significantly here with regard to the homicide of many of our the family members of the Afzal family. And last year we had 13 occurrences resulting in 16 deaths. And I think it's appropriate in light of some of our other conversations earlier here that is remarkable in that this is one of the few times when criminal homicides have equaled traffic fatalities. More often than not, traffic fatalities outnumber criminal homicides, and they're both extremely impactful and labor intensive. All of this is to say and acknowledge the tremendous efforts our frontline officers make, but we cannot deny that the back-end investigative workload is also increased. And like frontline, it does take a toll. So clearance rates for the selected crime types are reflected on the second page of the appendix, or page 4 of your report. Some of those rates have increased, others have decreased. And as I said, sometimes green means that things have increased, and that's positive, but you'll see that where we have provincial and national data, we're actually pretty close to the national averages. I do recognize that some rates may be distressing depending on the nature of the crime, in that they're not higher, but I'm actually going to suggest this is more of a balancing out of the rates that have not been accurate for years prior to the new clearance codes introduced by the CCJ CSS through Statistics Canada. As you'll be very aware of, but prior to those new clearance rates being in place, a number of occurrences may have been found unfounded, meaning that they were being, and now more are being left open because there's either insufficient evidence to proceed or the victim had complainants declined to proceed. These are new clearance rates that did not exist. And as many of the board members will know, I could speak on this subject for quite some time, given my role in helping to bring about those clearance rates on my committee work with the CACP. As previously mentioned, provincial and national 2021 data will not be available until later this summer, at which time overall crime rates will also be made available to the community and to the public. I am prepared to answer questions. However, if there are none, I would recommend the board receive this report for its information with the motion that's currently on the floor.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Betts. Before we get to questions, perhaps we can circle back to what Member Walker had raised earlier, which was to add femicides as a broken down number in Appendix A. Unless there's further discussion, maybe we can get a seconder on that and vote on that, and then we can continue the discussion. So that's a motion seconded by Councillor Cassidy. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you again for that. Now turning back to the report, any other questions or comments for the Deputy Chief? Member Branscombe? And just unmute yourself.
I have dogs. I keep myself on mute. I'm just this is very interesting. How would you look for trends? Like if you were that people might, if we aren't dealing with some things like theft and break and enter as well as we have in the past because of our maybe workload and so on. How would you determine if people just stopped calling, because they don't get satisfaction? Is there a way that you look for certain trends or or concerns in the reporting? I know this is kind of a general, it shows a up and down from year to year, but do we look for anything else in these kinds of reports?
Chair, through you, if I may, we absolutely do. And that, in fact, forms a lot of our annual reporting and our business planning processes. We look at long-term trends. I can tell you that generally speaking, up until 2014, crime rates were heading down. However, they took a slight uptick, and they've continued to take a bit of an uptick since then. We regularly review and receive information in what we call Jurastats, the statistics from Statistics Canada that are released, and we look for those trends as well. As you've pointed out, however, not all this crime is reported. So what we can report on are police reported crimes only. And we know that crime is underreported. We also know, and this is a bit of a back end UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting explanation, we do know that only the most 4 serious occurrences in any report are uploaded and sent to Statistics Canada. That's just to manage what they have in terms of the statistics that are reported. So the 4 most serious crimes are what's reported, extracted from local police services and reported up through StatsCan. So we have an occurrence that has 8 offenses on it. Only the 4 most serious are reported. Here's the caveat to that. If one of those happens to be mental health, and that's the 5th most serious incident involved, that may not be captured in any records because criminal offenses, violent criminal offenses, are what's uploaded first. And so this is why it's often difficult for us to report on the exact extent of the impacts of mental health on crime are, because it's always bundled with something else, and it's not always extracted based on the limitations of what we can work with. So not sure if that fully explained things, but I could go on.
Well, it does. I'm interested. Maybe we'll have a chat offline. I guess then my question is, why do we only report the top 5? I mean, isn't the entirety of the, how can you make decisions, I guess, based your decisions on trends if you don't really know what the trends are?
This absolutely goes back to the uniform crime reporting and what's been in place for years and years now. So it's essentially what was decided decades ago in terms of what would be manageable from a data extraction and review at the Statistics Canada level of things. And we could talk some more offline on that because I sit on that particular committee at CACP.
One small point, then do we do our own statistics? I mean, that's what this is then, correct? And it's not based on the UCR statistics, it's based on our own incidents here.
Chief, before I answer, I'll defer to you.
I was just getting in the queue, so you can finish. I just have a little fun fact when you're done.
Perfect. Fun facts are good. Yeah, no, this is reported on the top 4 because our record management system is structured for the top 4. So what our data shows is what we have available, and what we have available is what Census Statistics Canada. Well, there are other fields, they're just not coded with a UCR coding for upload to Statistics Canada.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Betts. Was that all the questions you had, Member Branscombe? Thanks. Chief Williams, over to you.
Thank you, through your chair. It's an interesting question about crime rates because, as you know, most crime is unreported. And there is a Statistics Canada survey, the General Household Survey, which most of you have probably seen. It's only done every 5 years, but it's an interesting measure of people's, part of it is victimization. So they report on victimization, and it's really shocking the amount of crime or victimization that occurs that is never reported to the police. So I think the next one isn't until 2025. The UK do it every 3 years, which is better, but we do it every 5 years in Canada. But it is an interesting measure, and you can break it down by community as well. So you can see, I mean, pick an offense type, and you can see what people are self-reporting versus what actually came to the attention of the police. So it's another measure of maybe where we could be putting resources. So.
Thank you, Chief. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so I just need a mover and seconder that we receive the 2021 Criminal Investigation Services Report, moved by Member Branscombe, seconded by Vice Chair. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Next time we have the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel monthly update. The only update is that our next meeting is June 7th. We haven't met since the last time I provided that update, so June 7th is that meeting. The Mental Health and Addictions Advisory Panel update is next, and Member Walker.
I'll just be brief, and my colleague Nancy Branscombe sits on the committee, and I co-chair it with Christine Geringer, and the committee is very invested and interested, and we are trying to determine how to get from about 5 areas of interest that they have down to 3. And it looks like that will happen at the next meeting in early June. So lots of engagement, and it's a great committee to sit on.
Thank you so much, Member Walker, for that update. And then we have our new business items. So we'll start with the uniform identifier complaints. So just by way of context, again, this was initially going to be dealt with at Public Governance Committee, but we ran out of time, so we pushed it to this. There was a complaint received by a member of the public, and Deputy Chief Betts, maybe you can just sort of give us that background and then the outcome, because I'm quite proud of where that went. So I wanted to make sure it was discussed. So Deputy Chief Betts.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. As you said, we did receive correspondence. I wouldn't even say it was in the form of a complaint, perhaps, but a concern that in February, late February, one of the demonstrations, as you had already spoke about, the freedom demonstrations, there was a counter demonstration. Some of our officers had attended. The officers were in high visibility safety vests. They wear those vests for the reasons that are obvious. They are high visibility. It's a safety measure for the officers. It also lets the people know who are attending that those are in fact police officers that they're dealing with. These vests are worn over top of the outermost layer of clothing. What the way we deploy those vests is they're a shared resource. It's a really, it was a cost containment measure. The vests are made available in the vehicles, and when an officer needs one, they put one on. The unintended consequence of that particular measure is that it unintentionally put us into conflict with PSA regulations and expectations, as well as our own chief's procedures that require us to have a personal identifier visible on the outermost layer of clothing of an officer. Clearly, in this particular instance, the writer provided photographs that show that those high visibility vests did not have a personal identifier. Now, I think that there is a very important distinction here. This was an unintended consequence as opposed to what was reported in the Morden report following the G20. There was no intent or there was no deliberate act to remove name tags here. This was simply putting on a safety vest for the purposes of officer and community safety. So the writer has quite rightly pointed out a inadvertent breach of our own procedures here. However, it has put us into a position of being able to address this. And the way we will do that is each individual officer will be issued with a vest. So this comes at a cost, of course, so we'll absorb that into the uniform budget, but each officer will be and is being issued with a vest with their name tag permanently affixed on there so that when they do put that on, their name is visible on their outermost layer of clothing. There's a bit of a time lag as we get to that particular stage. Those name tags need to be generated and need to be affixed to those vests, but it's definitely underway. That particular writer was reached out to multiple times via email, also telephone, and it indicated that, that he would take that back to the people who had brought it to his attention and provided him with those photographs. And if we didn't hear anything back, that would be the end of it. So we haven't heard anything back on that. It was a good catch. We appreciate that input and that feedback, and we'll be better as a result. So subject to any questions, that is a summation of that particular conclusion.
Any questions or comments? Thank you so much, Deputy Chief Betts. And I know it can seem counterintuitive to highlight, and I think you made a good point. It really wasn't a complaint. It was raising this concern. But the reason I think that this is something that we should share is to show how seriously this was taken. It was very responsive. Like there was immediately, it was identified, the concerns, what happened, and steps are being taken to address it. So I actually think this is a good news story from that sense. Yes, it started off with, oops, we're not in compliance with PSA, but ultimately I think it shows the willingness of LPS and LPS administration to respond, not to act defensively. So a special thanks to Inspector Sean Travis from the Professional Standards Branch for undertaking that investigation as well. Again, really commendable that those actions were all being taken. So thanks again for that. And then that leads us to the final new business item, which was at the Public Governance Committee. The Public Governance Committee passed a motion for recommendation for the Public Board as a whole to adopt. And member or Councillor Cassidy, perhaps you can just quickly walk through that motion that is being recommended to the board.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. So there is as we've discussed in the past and was passed at the last board meeting, there will be that the board, this was part of the motion that was passed, that the board aggressively pursues assessment growth funding as available, directs LPS administration to develop a budget amendment for the 2023 budget year to add additional frontline positions. So this budget amendment is what we're talking about. We are going ahead, administration is going ahead with as part of the budget cycle and the business cycle to do those public consultations. But this amendment portion is something different, and it's as we discussed in the meeting, City Council is on a 4-year budget cycle, so that sort of takes away what used to happen when the budget was an annual thing. There were public consultations that took place. So this what was decided to bring forward to the board from the public governance meeting was that the chief will, as he had planned to anyway, bring a report to the board and provide it in early September so that the board has this report regarding these amendments. And then in our September 15th public board meeting, there will be an opportunity for some engagement with the public, if they so desire, to discuss this proposed budget amendment that will be brought forward to City Council. So that was passed as a recommendation from the Governance Committee in the public session.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. So that was made a recommendation to the full board. So that's been moved by Councillor Cassidy. And do I have a seconder? Seconded by Member Walker. Any other discussion on that? All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you so much. It was a longer meeting than usual, but I think for very, very important and critical reasons. So thanks for everyone for sticking around. I just need a motion to adjourn. A quick note, the next meeting is Thursday, June 16th, so you can put that in your calendars. And a motion to adjourn, moved by, I think, Vice Chair, seconded by Member Walker. All in favor? And that is carried. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.